Okay. So Rob and I, Rob has this company called Trellis. Rob lives in Singapore, in London, and I'm in Santa Cruz. I've been in Santa Cruz since '85 and have been working at Catalyst since the early '90s. But Rob called me up and we started to get together about the kinds of challenges that we see faced with the startups that we're working with. And Rob and I both worked, Rob worked as a partner, but I worked as a consultant with Monitor, which is a strategy firm that's now Monitor Deloitte. And so we had some connections from the past that led up to this. Interestingly, Rob actually was running a startup in London. It had everything it needed to grow and scale. It had money, it had an idea, it had a mission, product fit, the whole 9 yards. They had to scale out. They were in India, US, and different parts of the world. They were in Latin America, and they hit a wall. And they basically could not get their company to function well enough to deliver what they promised to deliver, and they flamed out, basically. Rob thought a lot about that, and that is actually one of the impetus of why he wrote this book, because he understood that scaling means something different than what we think scaling means. And so that's what I'm going to talk to you about. And we work with a wide variety of startups, as well as more established companies like Autodesk, but Airbnb, which is more established now, a variety of different, but I primarily now am focusing on working with core leadership teams and rising companies that are, adding people and running into friction. So I'm going to talk about that. And I'd like it to be engaging. So I'm going to ask you to talk about it as well. So it's no fun just to stand up here and talk without actually getting some responses from the audience. So enough about the background. What I hope to do is I'm going to talk to you about a case of a startup struggling to scale, why scaling is hard, building a flywheel for success, which we want to keep productivity high, but we also have to keep positivity high. And they create a flywheel. We're going to talk about what I mean by positivity. And underneath that is, what is the underlying operating system that helps to reduce friction in an organization? I hope to get to one of the rituals. The book is the 20 rituals. We're not going to get to any number of those rituals. And in fact, what we would suggest for any startup that's wanting to start to ritualize their organization and get less friction in it is just pick one or two and start working with those. But I am going to talk about rituals to habits. That one of the things that we have found is if you create it as a ritual, then it's something that you keep following up on, and after that, it becomes just part of the habit of how you do work. So that's what we're going to cover. It's a lot. It's a mouthful, but I'm going to keep clicking on. So I want to talk to you about a company I work with. It's a SaaS company, and it's providing comprehensive solutions for payment processing. Their valuation somewhere around $4 billion. Their revenue is around $200 million. They have over $400 million invested in the company. Their growth rate is around 90. They would say it's higher, but I'm being conservative here. They have 550 employees. They've been going at this for 8 years. And the core leadership team is in New York, Tel Aviv, London, San Francisco, Seattle, St. Louis, and Denver. So they're spread out all over. This company was founded by 2 ex-intelligence officers in the Israeli military. And so they knew a lot about machine learning, and they applied a lot of that starting 8 years ago with this solution. They have about 28% of the engineering team of the group is engineering. Another 18% is go-to-market, and customer success is around 15% for installations and all of that. And you can see how they're showing their growth. Now, they even have a mission. Welcome, come on in. The mission was to empower businesses to grow confidently by eliminating fear of fraud, enhancing customer experiences, and streamlining operations. They even had a set of values: innovation, collaboration, customer centricity, and integrity. So they had what you would say for a startup, the 4 things to scale is they had a good mission, they had a product fit, they had a proven revenue model, and they had sufficient capital. Okay, pretty nice setup, right? Ready to IPO. And they called me and said, we're struggling. So I'd like you, because you all know about startups, I don't think you're not just new to that. Get with 1 or 2 other people, and I'd like you to think about what scaling challenges might this company face. Okay, just a couple of minutes. I want you to just guess. They had this all in place, but they had scaling challenges. What are they? What would you imagine those challenges to be? You had to guess. So just buddy up with 1 or 2 people and make talk about it and tell me what. Yeah. Don't have all that. But I would like if you would just popcorn out. What would you imagine some of the challenges that this startup is facing? Culture. Okay, elaborate a little bit more about culture.
Just how again, it sounds like they've got a lot of the critical things in place, right? They've got EMF and money and all that, but going from a small startup team to a big company, right? That's a drastic shift in your organizational structure and maintaining the culture that made you successful as a small company. Right? How do you scale that?
That's right. Okay, so and that's something I do want to try to address. So scaling culture could be part of the problem, right? Anybody? Yes.
Yeah, I would just kind of double down on that, and that their kind of cultural, or rather their values, are very aspirational, but not particularly tactical. And I think especially as they have a multinational team, they will need to figure out kind of how they operate as a team consistently, especially as they're thinking about adding headcount. What makes for a good addition to their team, and how does that person compose themselves,
right,
if they're going to add?
I mean, I don't know if it was your comment about ready to IPO was they contacted you because they were ready to IPO, or just generically. Seems like they're ready, right? But I would say there's a lot of governance that we were talking about. But also, if their customer success is only 15%, does that mean that?
I'm estimating because I don't really have that data. But go ahead, say more about. You would expect higher.
That's not and their revenue is 20 million.
200
million, yeah. How can you? To me, that seems like something's not off in terms of their marketing and branding. How are they getting their customers? And if you're not having more than 15% of.
So you question that?
Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Isn't that the amount of the size of the team that's on customer success? 15% of the organization is focused on.
Yes.
Oh, didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah.
Thought that meant.
Not 85% churn rate.
Okay. Yeah, that's okay.
No, their
Okay.
current rate is pretty good.
Oh,
Yeah. So
the retention is good.
the retention is good.
The churn shouldn't be good.
Yeah. No, thank you. Right.
Well, I was in that same vein thinking that big jump in revenue, and they're selling a lot of products, but on that same vein of customer success, are they able to deploy it, implement it, keep the same level of service with their customers through that
Right.
growth?
Any others? Any other ideas? Okay, so,
Alignment, basically. with-
say it, Mark?
Team alignment with the growth.
Team alignment with the growth. So I think you all have raised similar headaches that I ended up interviewing the C-suite and fed back what they told me. And so I'd like to just share some of that with you and kind of share with you that it takes more than just having these components that I shared earlier. It takes more than having these 4 things in place to really scale. So what I learned is what they told me, that building trust and having some sense of psychological safety so that they could have these tactical and strategical conversations in an open forum was a challenge. So there was a new CFO. We don't know what this person's going to do with, the revenue model. And they had, people of different cultures. And so there was a lack of what, in their words, not mine, trust. They also stalled at decision making. So there were some key strategic priorities that needed to be focused in on. And what I was learning is that a lot of these functions were running in their stream, in their swim stream, but there wasn't enough sort of cross-stream collaboration to really implement some of the strategic priorities that they were wanting to achieve. The other piece is they talked about accountability. So the interesting thing about the accountability is that there was a lack of autonomy to make decisions, but also a lack of willingness to raise when they weren't meeting their goals. So accountability was both from the standpoint of you have that role and this is your decision rights to that, but also when things weren't working, they weren't raising those challenges that they were having, even, and particularly ones where they were failing. Communication. So this is where the self-criticism regarding the company performance is what I was trying to get to earlier. And of course, there were bickering about budget trade-offs. And last is that there were these silos. So one was the customer support organization wasn't being supported well with the engineering team and Tel Aviv. And so there were a lot, that was a real challenge for them. And the interesting thing is when I dug in a little bit further about, so what have you done about those challenges? What actions have you taken to self-correct? I found that they really didn't go that far. So one of the key things that we worked on and have been working on is the ability for the C-suite to be able to see the enterprise as a whole organization and not a bunch of swim lanes. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but these were the things that the C-suite leaders identified, and we're working on these kinds of things. So I want to relate these challenges to what Rob talks about in his book, Smooth Scaling. Actually, I laugh at him about the title. I still think it's going to be bump scaling, but how can we smooth out some of the bumps, basically? So, so one of the concepts is if you go and you talk to people about scaling, they confuse scaling with growing. So usually if you ask somebody, I'm scaling my organization, they talk about the increase of their plans in revenue and growth and all of those kinds of things. But actually scaling is something different. Scaling is, in the definition of scaling, is enlarging something while preserving or enhancing the essential characteristics, which gets back to what you were saying about culture. One of the notion here is if you just take a picture and you blow it up, you get a bunch of pixels. But how do you blow the picture up so keeps its characteristics, and that's what smooth scaling is about. It's about what you as leaders can do in an organization to hold those characteristics. And in fact, when you're a smaller team and you're co-located, I work with a team in San Francisco right now. The majority of them are co-located in San Francisco. They have a nice, fun office at the Ferry Building. It's kind of cool. Has that setup like an old any kind of startup that has all the nice bennies around the cafeteria and stuff. They can work things out pretty easily. And if they have a challenge or an issue that shows up, they can just go and collect in the office and get on the whiteboard, or maybe they'll just go grab a beer downstairs and sit outside and look at the bay and work out their issue. But when you're scaling from, let's say, 18 people to 50 people to 100 people, you end up getting this kind of a picture. And that's what we want to talk about, is how to get beyond that. So you can have all these things in place, but we want to really now get your lens on, okay, so what do we do to actually keep the inherent characteristics that we had when we were a smaller startup to now a much larger one. So that's the positioning of the material that Rob has put. Headcount grows linearly, and if I can say that word, and then complexity happens when you add a bunch of other people. There are a lot of nodes in the network, and then friction increases, so complexity increases. So the whole idea is, how do you handle that kind of friction that's inherent when you scale from some 20 people to 75 people, or 75 to 150 to 200. So how do most entrepreneurs face this problem? They're growing their company. Things are on paper look really good, and yet there is headaches in the organization. So how do entrepreneurs, founders actually face this issue? And oftentimes what you find is they go, well, we have a problem with something, so we're going to launch a new product or a new feature set. We're going to go from a product to a platform, or we're going to offer new services, or let's grow out into Latin America now that we've got Asia and Europe kind of settled. Or we're going to change bowling lanes and we're going to open up to a new customer segment so that we can continue to grow this company. And what that is, it's a problem for more friction. And it's not dealing with the underlying friction problems. So these end up being complexity bombs that drive friction up. And so what we tend to do is we tend to patch together different things. So as an example, I'm working with another startup. They have difficulty between the marketing brand and group and the sales organization. And the sales organization's decided, well, they're just going to go out and hire people to help deal with the challenges that marketing's not being able to get to solve. So we just patchwork solutions into the system. And the next thing you know, you have a donkey that's hauling a bunch of different parts of an organization. And what will the founder or the CEO do in this situation? What would you imagine? They beat the donkey, right? Just go harder. Just go harder. And of course, you can go harder for a little bit, but not for very long. So one of the things that we've identified is that there are kind of 6 challenges that you can focus in on and start working toward. One is integrating new leaders and people in the organization. That was brought up. But the other thing is growing founders so that they become scaling leaders. The issue is that for most founders, they're in this situation the first time. They've never really actually, some have, but I mean, they haven't scaled an organization and they don't have an enterprise view themselves. You also need to foster the culture of accountability. The other issue is growing your C-level team so that they become more enterprise leaders. They're thinking about the whole of the company and not just their particular function. So it isn't that they are just successful if they deliver, it's successful when the enterprise delivers. Building high performance teams. And then the other thing that's common that we find is that there are silos that form. It's a natural phenomenon in organizations. And they end up having conflict. And the idea is, how do you prevent silos from having that kind of conflict so that they're more integrated in the organization? So why do entrepreneurs just try to push harder and put more product offerings out, more services? Because they want to get shit done. And it's a good thing. That's why they're entrepreneurs. But so it's about now the what and the how of getting shit done is important. So why is it a problem? And why don't we reduce friction in organizations? Because many entrepreneurs know that this is happening in their companies. Well, one is that there's really no good way to measure friction, right? You can do like the HR engagement surveys and things like that, but that kind of gives you the feedback that we don't have enough Coca-Cola in the refrigerator, or something along that line. There's a confusion often in the C-level team about the role culture can play. Oftentimes, the signals for friction in the organization comes late. And so it is going fine when we went from 25 to 100 people, but when we went from 100 to 125, things started to fall apart. And so there's this sort of inherent assumption that it worked fine before. Why is it working fine now? And the HR toolkits aren't sufficient enough, and there's just no playbook for how to deal with friction in startups. So actually, the main point, I don't want to reiterate, but oftentimes what we do in organizations, we put together a performance management system, put a competency matrix together, do training, and they're all sort of insufficient. I worked with in my past, I worked with a startup that was in India and US and Europe, and I ran Zoom manager trainings. They were helpful. They helped managers be better managers, but it was insufficient for dealing with the friction in this organization. So one of the things that Rob is saying, and I'm saying, is that it's what is missing is the quality of the interaction. That we're not doing enough to look at just the quality of the interactions that we're having. So there's a playbook, and we tend to do sales training, office upgrades, excellent benefits, even wellness days, and they're still not fixing the friction. So what fixes the friction? And that, by the way, this is what we normally think of will help the culture. But really all that does is it doesn't meet the underlying friction tensions in the organization. So one of the things that we try to help people to do is learn to iterate their interactions. and that they interact with people not to get the most out of each interaction, but to improve on the next interaction that we have. So we're trying to feed forward their ability to interact. I wanted to get you into a discussion session, though. I'm moving on to this. So the idea is balancing productivity with positivity. So we put as much attention or more attention on productivity because we still got to get shit done. But what we want to do is help build the quality of the interactions, create more psychological safety, and improve on the engagement and the morale so that people find the meaning and satisfaction in their work. It's not just to create a happy place to go to work. It's actually that each interaction ends up becoming a way of having fun or actually getting shit done in a positive manner. So that's the essence of what we're trying to get through. And I happen to be involved, we happen to be involved with Google when they launched their Project Aristotle study and trying to work on, and this substantiates much of what is in this book. And that is that, yes, you have to have teams that have impact. You have to have teams where people feel there's meaningful work being done, that there's structure and clarity. All that has to be in place, and that people are dependable. But what they found in this study that really made the difference between a good team and an excellent team. And this was with thousands of teams. The great thing about Google is they had thousands of teams that they could study. They had all their performance management stuff. They had what they produced and didn't produce, all those kinds of things. This idea of psychological safety was what made the difference. And the thing about it is, I think we confuse psychological safety. It isn't just that it's a safe place for me to say, it's that I can make interpersonal risks with my colleagues, team, cross team. I can take interpersonal risks, help each other, hold ourselves accountable, but do it in a respectful and also a way where we'll want to do that again and again in the future. So, I'm going to try something new. I put together a miniature survey about your interactions at work. And if you wouldn't mind, take out your phone and hit the QR code. Let me tell you what you're going to do before you do it. It's going to take you to a survey. The survey is not long. You have to put your email in. And it's going to send back to you what you said. And then I'd like to put you into just dyad groups and share what you're learning from the survey, and then we're going to talk about it. I plan to then just, you'll have to trust me on this, erase everything that's in the Google form. So I'm not even going to collect your email, so you won't get spammed by me. But basically, it is just to give you insight into your own personal experience at work. And just answer the questions as best you can. It's just to get some sense of also what we look for with startups when we're trying to assess where the friction points are. All right? So tell me if this works. I tested it, but all right. Fill it out and let me know when you're done. And you should get your results immediately to your email. And I hope it works. But I was wondering what came up in your conversations. I know you want to be careful not to reveal secrets, but I mean, in terms of just doing that, really the quick survey, it isn't an in-depth organizational. I worked with a group called Concern for Corporate Fitness, and it was a 15-page questionnaire, blah, blah, blah. This is just really to get some assessment of, are we getting the stuff done that we want to get done in the organization? And are we experiencing it in a positive way? And then we categorized it in terms of with your peers, with your team overall, with your direct manager, with this, and with the top leaders. So anybody, would you just share something that came up? So one of the things that we want to build on to get positivity up is we want to create better peer relationships. So one of the things in your situation, if there are a couple of key people, it's how you build that relationship so they are also able to create a more positive interaction with others and still get the things done. That when you start a hierarchy, that managers have to have great one-on-ones, trying to create high performance teams, and then identify the key areas where there are siloed friction and actually dive into those. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that stuff. Because what we're trying to do is we're trying to get away from, gee, this is a happy place to come to work, to this is a happy place to doing the work. So Rob identified these 20 rituals. I'm not going to read through this. There's a book. I have some books here, but I am going to talk about some key ways to think about this. So you'll notice in our conversations, and even in the way that we talk about it, there's a difference between what we would consider an it conversation that's about fixing the problem, whether it's geographic expansion, bringing in new people, all of those kinds of things, getting the product built so that it is dealing with customer issues. Those are all it conversations. And then there are us conversations. And that focuses on the dynamic of the relationship and the system problems we have in our bureaucracy or conflict. So your example is a perfect example of maybe possibly taking some time to have an us conversation with your colleague versus the it conversation. So segmenting that in your mind is a helpful thing to do. The other thing is that effective dialogue drives the interaction, both productively and positive. And I want to talk about effective dialogue. But this is a skill set that we focus and double click on to help people with. And I presented, I think, in February. If you go back, I go and talk more about effective dialogue. But it's the underlying operating system. And what I mean by that, and if you have that as your underlying operating system, so when you are deciding on who to hire, what to do with your budget, giving feedback, or aligning to strategy, any of those kinds of issues, those are just things, those are the apps that you put on to expect effective dialogue. So what do I mean by effective dialogue? So what we're talking about is the ability to have some openness and vulnerability. So if you're going to have an us conversation, that opens the door for vulnerability. Because I've got to share something about myself and how I'm contributing to the problem as well as my colleague. We have to have the skill set so that we can listen well enough so there's mutual understanding. We also have to have the ability to deal with conflicts and see them as systems issues as well. So I'm working with another company, and the CEO identifies problems, conflicts in the organizations, and then just says, we just don't have the right salesperson in the leading sales team. And he sees problems by individuals versus seeing so we're helping him to reflect on what is in the system such that this conflict is occurring. So there's more of a dynamic of there's mutual learning going on between the sales and the engineering team, as an example. And then there is the ability for this, and in this company too, the real issue is that he has a bunch of leaders in their functional swim lanes, and they're not thinking about the whole of the organization. So what we mean by that, that is a mindset shift that needs to occur so these things can happen in an effective dialogue. One of the key kind of skill sets that we teach people about effective dialogue is their ability to advocate their view in a constructive, reasoned manner, their ability to inquire into somebody else's view in a way that I create what I would say cognitive empathy. So I could actually talk back at you and actually promote your idea that satisfies what you're thinking. So I have a perfect issue where it's in the R&D group of an organization. The two main leaders are in conflict with one another about technological decision. And I literally had to help them get to the point where they could argue both sides. And when they started doing that, they started to really be able to step back from their emotion and get to a place where they could assess the pros and cons in a more constructive conversation because they had the us understanding. And then summarizing is really, this is a key skill. How many have been in a room where there's an argument, you're in a team meeting, there's an argument between two people, and it keeps going back and forth like this, and everybody else in the room is quiet? Yeah. So we're actually part of the system's problem because we're watching this back and forth and we don't know how to get in. We don't know actually how to help. So one of the key skills that we help people to do is to be able to summarize what are the bids on the table and summarize them in a way that does create this cognitive empathy. And that's really what we mean by mastering dialogue. So I've mentioned this before, I'm not going to go into, and I think, but the other thing is that the core team needs to become enterprise leaders. And Rob identified 4 rituals that you could use to help create that mindset with the core team, so that they engage in the entire business, not just their area, that they proactively offer support, they're able to manage their conflicts, and that teams that have an enterprise mindset, according to Bain, say that 68% more innovative and 21% more adaptive. Now, I'm not going to get into that study, but I'd throw one of those things in there to show that if you're focusing on enterprise leadership, you will have much more positivity, but you'll also be a lot more productive because you're really dealing with the organization as a system. Bloody meetings. Do you know that in fact, I'm going to show you a piece of software that begins to measure this, but that 30 to 50% of the organization's total cost goes into, if you count meetings. So if you count the number of meetings, the number of hours, and put your salary on it, and you start looking at that, that's a lot of expense. So we miss an opportunity to really try to make meetings more meaningful. And so what we get some organizations to do is just through very simple ways to measure and track their meeting time costs, to evaluate their meetings, to learn how to do deep dives. So one of the things that is helpful is when you find there is a really deep conflict between two functions in the organization, if you purposefully and intentionally design that meeting to help resolve that issue. You just don't say, it isn't just like, well, I want those two folks to figure it out and fix the problem. It's that you design to fix that problem and you're continuously fostering productivity. So this is what I talk about in silo conflicts. We have this ritual setting up cross-functional work for success. it helps you to figure out how to design that meeting for resolving the conflict. So what should you do? Well, I don't recommend doing all 20 of those rituals. All right, that is not the way to do it. But you can start thinking about how can we begin building more of a dialogue culture where we're really focusing on the interaction of people and putting some of this in order. So that's a good place to start. So training people in effective dialogue. And this whole idea of that I have my function and I also have the enterprise in mind. So I have both lenses going all the time with core leaders. And it's really about, making the work fun, not having a fun place to come to work. Or the benefits and all of that stuff is nothing more than just get you on the playing field. What you can do is you can increase the actual experience of people interacting, having, I'm not saying fun, but having positive experiences getting the work done. It's not always fun. When I get feedback, it's not fun. So we have 5 minutes. I've got an exercise. I'm not going to do it, but I thought one of the things that I could do is just give it to you, and you can think about doing this yourself and possibly sharing it with someone. So one of the things that I did with that SaaS company is we had an offsite meeting where we could do a deep dive into some of the key strategic issues. But before getting into that conversation, I had them develop their own personal user guide and they shared them. So basically what the guide asks you to do is to, and if I could have, I have one. Basically what it does is it asks you, what is your basic work style? And what do you prefer and how does it show up? And then some of the key questions are like, what are my greatest strengths? And how can people take advantage of them? Which of the strengths do I overuse and what's the impact? What are 1 or 2 triggers, things that trigger me? What's something that I'm committed to working on? So each of these executives that I'm working with at the core leader have a personal thing that they are working on to either be more productive or create more positivity. And how can others help that individual get to it? So as an example, in your situation, what I found people do is they just have like a quick signal. You're coming across, not helpful, but you don't say that. You just say, whoever the person's name is, and you have a word or something that helps that individual understand that they're not being productive or not creating a good interaction with you. So there are all kinds of things like that. So what I invite you to do is fill that out, which I know you won't do because you're going to run off to your next meeting, but it's an invitation to fill that out and to share it with somebody. And that's the one thing I didn't get to today.
We can institute something like this for new hires between the manager and the hire.
Yeah.
It's really helpful. It's a way to have.
But now think about you and your team sharing this with each other. That would be helpful. That's a great integration for the manager or a new person, but all right, questions?
On your it versus us,
Yeah.
because I know a lot of people say focus on the process, not the people. Do you actually call that out? Do you say specifically, you know what? we've been talking about let's have an us conversation.
Absolutely.
Just call it out front, so we put so we don't go down that rabbit hole, we know, and it gives everybody like a disclaimer, like, here's what's.
Perfect.
Okay,
And I don't care what word you use, but it's a different, it could be people process or, this stuff's been around for eons. But you're segmenting the context that I want to talk about how you and I can interact better so that we can get the if problem fixed.
and is that typically something you suggest as a one-on-one?
That's great to do it one-on-one. If you're leading a team, it would be great to be able to talk about that at the team level. That you have some reflection about how are we, it could be we, how can we improve this interaction? So take meetings, all the meetings you have with your team, and people are doing different things on Zoom because they're not finding it fully engaging. It's not that I have all these distractions. I use the distraction because I'm not fully invested in the meeting. So how can we turn that around? So that would be a we conversation. All right. Yes.
Is it fair to say that it's important to focus on the process versus the people, because although it's really not right, we use the processes in order to friction. But is there a tipping point in an organization, a startup, where you focus on the people, 2 people, 3 people, that it really says, okay, now's the time to go for process versus.
So can you give me an example? Because we're using people and process, and I'm trying to get a sense of what.
Yeah, I mean, my experience is I worked in, dyadic relationships, worldwide organizations, and it's around that 30, 25 person organization where it starts to tip.
Yeah.
And I just wonder if you have any guidance on that, like, imagine some of us are in that same boat where, okay, we better start putting those systems in place, those processes, versus focus and knowing I can just reach out to Mary or Joe, right?
Yes, yeah. Well, that's still an it conversation. It's like, what processes do we need to have in place so this is streamlined? Well, what I would also say that needs to be focused on is what is how do we identify that? And what is the interaction that you and I have in order to figure out what we don't want to put too much process in place. So there's always that. I remember I worked at Sun Microsystem, and I used to come in and talk about, well, you guys need some process, and it was like people started putting out the garlic and chasing me away as if I was the Dracula. They didn't want process; they wanted. Google's a perfect example. The reason that we started working with Google is that Google's wanted not to have managers. Hell, we are hiring the smartest people we can find in the market. Let's just put them in a good office space and let them self-organize, and they'll get the right shit done. But the engineers in that organization rebelled. We need some process in here. We need a manager. So in that respect, that's what I mean, that you need to have some process. But the interaction to solving that problem, basically, is what I would say you would want to really focus on, so that as you scale, all those people that you're scaling up also have that skill of dialogue, have that skill of, we got to focus on our positivity. I want to make sure every interaction I have with you is going to be a better interaction in the future. All those kinds of things, and that they have the expectation that they're going to focus on.
Just curious about the question, because nowadays a lot of companies are working with teams in-house, remote, online. Do you see difference between teams that are working in an office, teams that are all working remotely?
Yeah. What did you find?
We used to work in an office, we work everything online. I think online is so much better.
Yeah.
walk into an office and everyone, this is not working, that's not, spend so much time in meetings.
Oh, really? So, yeah, that's,
Yeah, the system, you just, this needs to be done, and just look at the outcomes. And not have to worry about, how are they getting it? Personally for me, but I'm just wondering.
so I don't have a clear answer. If I talk to a lot of my colleagues at Google who are running engineering organizations, they find that when we're co-located, I can pull you over, I have a problem, I can pull you over and we can go to the whiteboard and in 5-10 minutes, I can get my answer. If you are in a different location, I have to set up a meeting with you. There are all these friction points for having that free flow. However, I think it's a personal preference kind of thing. I know some people who really love working from their own location and just working things out on Zoom or whatever. But I also find that I don't have an answer. I think it's a personal preference.
Does it also have to do about what you're trying to accomplish? I mean, you don't need a meeting for everything.
Right.
It doesn't have to be face to face all the time. It doesn't have to be virtual all the time. It just really depends.
It really depends. So if you're doing a deep dive meeting, you can still do that over Zoom, because you're structuring a meeting that might last 2 to 3 hours. But
You don't get that team bonding thing.
No,
Right.
There is something, I don't have a good answer to that, other than I still think all those skills we talked about, your dialogue skills, the ability for me to cognitively understand you and you to me, still has to happen virtually or in person. And that is probably one of the most, clearest ways I know to improve that, gee, I want to have my meeting with you. Even though you and I have to work something out, there will be conflict and contention between us, but I still like working those things out with you.
The Economist just did an article on that, but cited all the leading studies. It said it's unclear. What Gallup came out earlier saying 70% less efficiency, but short term, not long term, COVID. So it's kind of like, I think it's like you said, see, the people dependent on what's going to be kind of like